The events leading up to the end of the Age of Legends began with the experiment being run by a research group at a university in Visain. The Column Dan was a great center of learning, housing some of the world's foremost scholars and experts on the One Power. Its most distinguishing feature was an egg-like structure called the Sharom that floated above the university. There were no stairs leading up to it, nor was it suspended under any string or any construct. It was just one of those wonders of engineering that could be created with the use of the One Power. Mirin, Eronile, Beidomon, and the rest of the research team were running the experiment inside this structure. They were hoping to find a new source of power for channelers to use. Instead, they found and breached the Dark One's prison. A great wave of power exploded outwards, shattering the Sharom just like the egg it resembled. This wave spread outward through the world and altered reality as it did so. It was as though nature itself were groaning in anticipation of what was to come. There were many casualties that day, but I highly doubt anyone realized the significance of the event. They probably wrote it off as an experiment gone wrong and most likely forgot about it. The Dark One was not wholly freed by this, but a fissure in his containment allowed his touch to trickle through the world and to begin affecting humanity. Before this time, men had to contend only with the evil within themselves. But the father of lies stirred discontent and ill will within them. Petty jealousies, long buried feuds, and anything you can think of that will drive humanity to rebel and to fight and to turn against one another. The Dark One exploited all of this. The public rioted and tried to rebel against the structure of government. I hope I've not misled you. This society was not perfect. There were already a few cracks at the seams in terms of the structure of government and how things were being run. But the Dark One's touch exacerbated all these problems and made it just fall apart. Nor did he limit himself to guiding human nature along a darker course. Natural disasters began to occur. Previously, Aes Sedai had been able to regulate weather conditions as needed, but now they were hard-pressed to react in time to save lives. Drought, famine, and floods just swept through the land. To these people who had never endured such extreme conditions, it seemed as though the world itself was coming to an end. And it was, just not the way they thought. Amidst this turmoil, it fell to the leaders to try and find solutions to some of these problems. Chief among these was Therin Telamon, who was the first among the servants, leader of the Aes Sedai, and the 9 Rods of Dominion, who ruled regions of the world. Governed it, that's the better word. They called for a meeting to discuss the state of things and to try and find measures to fix what was wrong in the world. Just to discuss, a meeting of world leaders. The greatest minds in the world were in attendance, and the event garnered quite a large media presence. Everyone knew that something had changed. Something was wrong, very, very wrong, but no one could figure out what was happening. One of those in attendance was a man named Ilan Morin Tedronai. He was the foremost philosopher of the age and an Aes Sedai whose ability equaled Lews Therin's own. His books were considered to be too esoteric for public consumption, but they were well respected within intelligent circles. This man stood up before the Council of Leaders and revealed the truth of what they were facing. He told them of the Dark One, and of the ongoing battle between Lews Therin's soul and this being who wanted to remake the wheel of time in its image. The people were horrified, but All that paled when Ilan Morin went on to call for the abolition of all things. He declared that he would serve this being and bring about the end of days. After discovering the truth, he had done a few calculations that had proved that it was foolish to resist the Dark One. Shaitan had infinite chances to destroy the world. It was inevitable that he would one day win. When they finally had the truth, the people didn't know what to think. What were they to do when the scope of what they faced transcended the mortal and went into the realm of gods? Ilan Morin's pronouncement sowed even more chaos than the world had previously known. Great leaders, revered members of society, and other influential people began to publicly declare themselves for the shadow. These followers of the dark, among them the high and the low in equal number, began to gather and make plans on how to conquer the world. And in the shadow, the Dark One's touch permeated every heart, stirring fear where appropriate, or anger, or desire for power, whatever best served his needs. People began to commit crimes once thought to be too heinous to consider. Murder, rape, and worse soon became rampant. Bloodlust swept up the people, and they rediscovered the arts of war, of fighting, of mass torture. Some even invented new heights of cruelty. For a time, there was a game that came into popularity. Two contestants will be given knives coated with a slow poison and were bid to fight each other. In the end, both will be dead, but the fun, or rather what drew the crowd, was not to find who was the best swordsman, but to revel in the agony of these two people who were doomed to die. The Dark One also whispered to Aes Sedai, promising them power beyond imagining and immortality. If they forsook their oaths of service and took up his cause, they would receive these and even greater gifts, greater abilities. Some listened. These Aes Sedai traveled to the pit of doom in Shayol Ghul, the point in the pattern where the breach had occurred, and there they swore new oaths, dark oaths that tore their souls from the pattern and let the Dark One use them as he willed. To the best of these, he granted power and ability, such that they were like demigods to their fellows. These were his chosen, those who would rule the world in his name, or at least that's what they told themselves. Amidst this turmoil and uncertainty, Therin Telamon met Ilyena Moirel Dalisar, and he promptly fell in love. She was a beauty whose greatest feature was her golden tresses. They earned her the name Ilyena Sunhair. She was widely admired, I have to say. Unlike his previous relationship, this one worked out, since Ilyena really did care for him. Speaking of Merin, she was insanely jealous of Ilyena. She made a point of disrupting their relationship as often as she could. At the wedding, she even made a nuisance of herself and had to be shoved out. Her obsession with Therin went on to become a great asset to the Shadow, as she became the person who knew him best among the Dark Friend host. Because of course she went to the Shadow. Merin's great lust is power. And so of course she went where she had the best chance of gaining the most power. Insane when you think about it. Therin once described his life for Ilyena as such. This was one of those moments where Merin was just throwing herself at him and being like, "Oh, you left me, you left me." Therin replied and told her, I never knew what love was. I never loved you. I had lived for centuries and I'd never discovered love until I met her. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of what he said. It's also worth mentioning that Therin's second in command, Barid Belmedar, also desired Ilyena. It was just one of those things that led to his defection to the Dark One. I mean, she chose Therin over him, so it seemed that Therin was getting everything. Barid Belmedar would come to be known as Demandred, a general whose efforts really helped the Shadow. The War of Power began in earnest 100 or so years after the breaching of the Dark One's bomb. It was a desperate battle from the very beginning. The Dark One's forces had great powers on their side and the advantage of their master's plan, while the forces of the light were divided among themselves. Each great man fancied himself a general and there was discord all over. Not to mention the fact that the arts of war were merely recently discovered to them, and many were too hesitant to use some of the more extreme strategies. And the war was not fought, well, it was not merely a war of man against man, for the Shadow had ever been crafty and soon they had figured out an advantage. There was one among their number, one of the chosen, who was a genius. He created foul creatures to serve as the foot soldiers. Among these were Trollocs, beastly things with heads of animals and the flesh and body of a man. All to human eyes, there were the Feds, or half-men as they were sometimes called, who were cloaked in shadows and wielded blades made of the souls of the innocents. Among these also were the Dragkar, flying bat-like beings who swooped down from the sky and crooned their victims into their arms before promptly sucking out their souls. And there were others, Golem, who were made specifically to kill Aes Sedai. It was a desperate fight, with both sides trying for every advantage. The Light unified behind Therin's banner and learned to use the slash and burn tactics that they had once eschewed. New weaves were discovered and existing ones were adapted to be used in war. Especially the mining weaves came in handy in terms of explosives and such. Weapons forged of the One Power were granted to soldiers to supplement their shock lances, and even Bellfire was used. This was a powerful weave. Bellfire burns out a person from the pattern. It was so extreme. In fact, its use almost destroyed the world, because anytime Bellfire was used, it would burn a person from the pattern. Depending on the strength of the weave, events that had occurred would cease to have occurred. It was just chaotic. Both sides decided not to use it anymore, just spontaneously, because there was no point in winning a world when said world was destroyed. Over time, the Shadow took control of much of the land, especially after Buried Belmeda's betrayal. This happened 3 years after the War of Power officially began. He had become so insanely jealous of Therin that he just wanted an opportunity to destroy this man. So he joined the Shadow. And since he was a brilliant general, he really added to their victories. At the tail end of all of this, the Light found itself cornered. In desperation, they tried to find a way of winning the war, or at least delaying defeat. They had fought valiantly, but the resistance was just doomed.